Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it to clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human researched and written material.
Glad to be here. I mean, this is such an incredible section of text we're getting into today.
It really is. So I want you to imagine achieving literally everything you ever thought you wanted. Like, you have unparalleled wealth. You have the ear of the most powerful leader on the planet.
Right, the absolute peak of society.
Exactly. Massive estates, unmatched social status, just a level of comfort that most people in your era couldn't even hallucinate. And yet, you find yourself sitting alone in a quiet room, completely disillusioned, realizing that you're essentially a prisoner in a jail cell of your own making.
Yeah, which is just a wild juxtaposition.
It is. And that was the reality for Lucilius Seneca. We are stepping back about 2,000 years into the mind of a man who, he conquered the Roman world materially, only to realize that the only conquest that actually matters is the one inside your own skull.
Beautifully put.
Thanks. So today we are plunging into a specific sequence of his moral letters to Lucilius, specifically chapters 75 through 83. And we have a singular mission for this deep dive, which is to excavate the tools that will actually fortify our minds against the chaos of modern life.
And, the landscape Seneca is writing from it's honestly eerily identical to our own. I think we often suffer from this chronological snobbery.
Oh, chronological snobbery. I like that.
Right. Like, we think that because we have smartphones and artificial intelligence, our psychological struggles are somehow unique to us. But Seneca is writing to his friend Lucilius, who was a Roman official, by the way, from a Rome that is just drowning in distraction.
It was essentially an attention economy on steroids, wasn't it?
Literally. Rome was absolutely obsessed with spectacle, with status, with the constant frantic pursuit of the next dopamine hit. So before Seneca can even begin to offer advice on how to handle, relationships or career setbacks or physical suffering, he insists on this brutal, honest diagnosis of the internal state of the mind.
Which makes sense. You have to clean house first.
Exactly. He demands that we define what it actually means to be a functioning, quote-unquote, good human being before we interact with the external world at all.
Well, and the scene he paints to illustrate this is just incredible. So in chapter 76, he describes walking past the Neapolitan Theater, and it is just absolute pandemonium.
Oh, yeah, it's packed.
The place is packed to the rafters, and the crowds inside are screaming. They're passionately arguing over, who's the most skilled flute player?
Right, just completely consumed by this trivial entertainment.
Meanwhile, Seneca walks past them to the philosopher's lecture hall, the place where people are supposedly discussing the fundamental questions of human existence, character, virtue, all of that. And that hall is practically empty.
It's empty. And the people outside at the theater actually view the people inside the lecture hall as, lazy, empty-headed idlers.
Yeah, it's so backwards. And later, in chapter 80, he mentions the entire city flocking to a boxing match, leaving him in peaceful isolation. I mean, it's impossible not to see the modern equivalent here.
Oh, absolutely. The theater is our social media feed.
Exactly. It's our obsession with celebrity gossip or reality television. The crowd is passionately arguing in the comment sections about absolutely nothing of substance, while the pursuit of actual wisdom is treated as this niche, almost boring hobby for outcasts.
Yeah, and that contrast between the noise of the crowd and the silence of self-reflection is where Seneca introduces a foundational concept of Stoic psychology. This is in chapter 75.
Okay, lay it on me.
He forces us to look inward and distinguish between two distinct afflictions of the human mind. He calls them the diseases of the soul and the passions of the soul. Understanding the mechanism behind these two states is basically the first step to reclaiming your attention.
The terminology sounds almost medical. How does he actually separate a disease from a passion?
Well, he treats philosophy as medicine for the soul, right? So a disease, in Seneca's framework, is a hardened chronic vice. It is a deep-seated corruption of your value system.
So it's not just a bad mood.
No, not at all. Think of a relentless, toxic ambition, or an insatiable greed that just dictates every decision you make. These aren't passing moods. A disease of the mind means your judgment has been permanently warped.
Wow, permanently warped.
Right. You look at something that is only mildly desirable, say, a slightly more prestigious job title or a slightly larger house, and your diseased mind convinces you that it is an absolute necessity for your survival and happiness. You value the external object completely out of proportion to its actual worth.
It's basically a chronic delusion.
Exactly. A chronic delusion.
Okay, so if the disease is a permanent distortion of reality, like a bad operating system, then what is a passion?
So passions are acute. They are sudden, vehement impulses.
Like getting suddenly furious in traffic.
Perfect example. A flash of blinding road rage when someone cuts you off. Or a sudden, overwhelming wave of terror right before a public speaking event. They are violent and objectionable, but they are temporary.
They wash over you and recede.
Exactly. But here is the critical psychological warning Seneca issues. If you let a sudden passion go unchecked, right? If you allow that flash of anger to happen repeatedly without analyzing it, it calcifies.
Ooh, it hardens.
The acute passion hardens into a chronic disease. He uses the vital analogy of a catarrh, basically what we would call a chest cold.
Okay.
One single attack of a cold brings on a cough. It's annoying, but it's temporary. However, if that cough becomes regular, chronic, and untreated, it turns into consumption. It destroys the lungs permanently.
The neurology of that is fascinating because modern science actually backs him up entirely.
It really does.
Right, because if you allow your amygdala to constantly hijack your brain with sudden flashes of anger or fear, the passions, your brain eventually wires itself to default to that state.
Yeah, neuroplasticity. Neurons that fire together, wire together.
Exactly. The neural pathways thicken, so the temporary passion becomes a chronic disease. The road rage turns into a fundamental belief that the entire world is out to get you.
Which is a terrifying way to live.
It really is.
Yeah.
But Seneca also acknowledges that reversing this process is incredibly difficult. He maps out 3 classes of people who are actually making progress on this journey, which I appreciate, because he knows nobody becomes a perfect Stoic sage overnight.
Oh, yeah. The realism in his assessment is super refreshing. He doesn't demand immediate perfection. He looks for directional momentum,
Right, forward progress.
So the first class of people making progress are those who have managed to cure the chronic diseases. They have rewired their fundamental beliefs. They are no longer chronically greedy or fundamentally cruel.
That's a huge step.
Massive step. But they haven't entirely escaped the passions, so they still get hit by sudden waves of anger or fear, and they have to fight to regain their balance. They are standing on solid ground, but it's slippery.
Which honestly feels like most people who take self-improvement seriously. Like, you stop being a toxic person, but you still lose your temper when your flight gets canceled.
Exactly, you're human. And then he moves to the second class.
Right, what's their deal?
The second class has achieved a bit more stability. They've escaped both the major chronic diseases and the severe violent passions.
Okay, so they're pretty zen.
Mostly. But their immunity is fragile. If you put them under extreme, sustained pressure, like a massive financial crisis or a bitter divorce, they risk sliding backward into old, destructive habits. They are in remission, but the cancer could return.
That makes total sense. But it's the third class that really hooked my attention. Seneca describes these people as having escaped the major heavy vices.
Right.
They've conquered avarice, lust, the obvious corruptions of character. But they still struggle with the lingering ghosts of lesser flaws.
Yeah, the subtle stuff.
Like, they might have conquered their desire for wealth, but they still occasionally crave validation. They might have stopped fearing death, but they still flinch at the thought of physical pain.
It's this incredibly nuanced view of human growth. Even when you are doing incredibly well, there are still shadows to fight.
Yeah. But it forces a larger question, I think. If the goal is to rid ourselves of these diseases and passions, what's the target? Like, what is the baseline we are trying to return to? What does a healthy human soul actually look like?
Well, Seneca tackles that in chapter 76 by asking the ultimate philosophical question, which is, what is the unique good of a human being?
Okay, a big question.
Right. And to find the answer, he looks at the natural world. He argues that every single thing in nature is evaluated by the standard of its own unique purpose, its own specific good.
Give me an example.
So a vine is valued for its productiveness and the flavor of the wine it yields. A stag is valued purely for its speed. A hunting dog is valued for its courage and its keen sense of smell.
And a mule for its strong back.
Exactly. In every instance, the quality that makes the thing good is the specific quality for which that thing was brought into existence.
Right. You don't get angry at a dog because it doesn't produce wine. You evaluate it based on what it is built to do.
That leads to his central thesis. What is the peculiar, unique quality of a human being? I mean, it isn't physical strength, right? A lion is stronger.
It isn't beauty. A peacock is more striking.
Right. It isn't speed. A horse will outrun us. We share a physical body with the trees, and we share a voice with the nightingale. So what is uniquely ours?
What does he say?
Seneca says it is perfected reason. the ability to observe the world, process reality without delusion, and act with rational virtue.
Perfected reason.
Yeah. When our reason is well-ordered, when it aligns with the truth of nature rather than the distortion of our passions, we reach our perfection. Perfect reason is what the Stoics call virtue. It is the only true good.
Okay, I have to throw a massive wrench into this on behalf of the modern listener.
Do it.
Because Seneca goes on to use these analogies to explain this concept, and they're incredibly challenging. He argues in chapters 76 and 80 that you wouldn't judge a ship by the costly colors painted on its side, or its gold prow, or the immense wealth of the cargo in its hold. You judge a ship by whether it is sturdy in a storm, whether its seams keep out the water, and whether it obeys the helm. And he also says you wouldn't buy a horse while it's still wearing its blanket.
Yeah, that's a great one.
You would demand that the blanket be taken off to inspect its actual musculature and bones. He is demanding the absolute stripping away of the external.
It is a ruthless demand for authenticity over presentation.
But let's look at the reality of 21st century capitalism. We live in a society that is fundamentally built on evaluating the gold prow.
Oh, 100%.
We evaluate people based on their LinkedIn profiles, the neighborhood they live in, the university degree on their wall, the follower count on their social media. These are the modern gold prows and horse blankets.
Definitely.
So my question is it truly possible, or even responsible, to just strip off the blanket? Can we really judge ourselves purely on internal reason, when our survival, our ability to pay a mortgage, and our professional networking all depend on how brightly our gold brow shines?
You know, the friction you are feeling is exactly why Stoicism is so countercultural and so difficult to actually practice.
Because it goes against everything we're taught.
Exactly. We are conditioned from childhood to attach our identity to those external add-ons. We believe we are our job title. We believe we are our bank account.
Yeah.
But Seneca isn't arguing that you should burn your house down or refuse to participate in the economy. I mean, he is a wealthy Roman. He understands the utility of money.
Right. He was one of the richest men in Rome.
His argument is really about identity and attachment. If you attach your core self-worth to the gold prow, you are building your entire psychological foundation on a fault line.
Why?
Because the gold prow can be ripped away by forces entirely outside of your control.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right. An algorithmic shift destroys your online business. A corporate restructuring eliminates your prestigious job title. A market crash wipes out your wealth. If your identity is tied to those things, then when they vanish, you are utterly annihilated.
You cease to exist because the external markers cease to exist.
Yes. To survive the volatility of life, you have to separate your internal value from your external conditions. Seneca has a line that perfectly captures this. He says, "A dwarf is not tall, though he stand upon a mountaintop. A colossal statue will still be tall, though you place it in a well."
That is such a vivid image.
Isn't it? We spend massive amounts of energy trying to climb the mountain, trying to build the highest possible pedestal, the promotion, the luxury car, the zip code, believing that the height of the pedestal actually increases our own stature.
We confuse the altitude of our circumstances with the magnitude of our character.
Ooh, that's good. Yes, that is the illusion of the disease. We have to stop measuring the pedestal along with the person.
Yeah.
If you put a foolish, vicious person in a CEO's chair, they are still a foolish, vicious person. The chair didn't change their nature. And if you put a person of profound virtue and perfect reason in a prison cell, their virtue remains completely intact. The well doesn't shrink the colossus.
Translating that into a practical exercise is terrifying, but I think it's essential. Seneca gives us the directive in chapter 80 to evaluate ourselves naked, to strip away the disguise. He says to put away your money, your estates, your honors, and look solely into your own soul.
Such a hard thing to do.
But the practice for anyone listening is to do this tonight. Sit in a quiet room and strip it all away. Imagine your company goes bankrupt today. Imagine your social media accounts are permanently deleted. Imagine your bank account goes to zero. What is left?
Are you still sturdy?
Exactly. If the storm hits, do your seams keep out the water? Do you still have patience, courage, and clear judgment? Or do you completely collapse because the blanket was removed?
It forces a reckoning with how much of our confidence is synthetic. And this leads to a vital reflection point from chapter 75. Seneca warns against treating philosophy as an intellectual parlor trick.
Just talking the talk.
Right. He says, let speech harmonize with life. We see this everywhere today, people posting profound quotes on social media, adopting the aesthetics of mindfulness or stoicism, but acting with brutal selfishness in their private lives.
It's all just performance art.
Exactly. Seneca argues that the promise of philosophy is only fulfilled when your private actions flawlessly match your public rhetoric. You have to be the same person when you are seen as when you are heard.
Well, that internal clarity, that alignment of speech and life, is one thing when you are healthy and sitting comfortably in your living room.
Sure.
But Seneca doesn't let us stay in the theoretical. His entire framework gets dragged through the fire when we encounter section 2 of this exploration, which covers the ultimate tests of physical decay, intense pain, and our own mortality.
Heavy stuff.
Yeah, because what happens to perfect reason when the body itself begins to fail?
The historical context here is crucial because it proves Seneca wasn't just preaching from an ivory tower. In chapter 78, he is deeply vulnerable about his own physical agony.
I was really surprised by this part.
Most people are. He suffered from severe chronic asthma, which he referred to as catarrh, and it was often accompanied by debilitating fevers. It wasn't a mild shortness of breath.
No, it sounded horrific.
He describes suffocating to the point of extreme thinness, basically wasting away. The pain and the exhaustion of fighting for every breath were so profound that this master of Stoicism, this man who wrote endlessly about enduring hardship, actively planned to end his own life.
Which completely shatters the modern stereotype of the Stoic as a cold, unfeeling robot.
Totally.
He was in such visceral agony that he wanted to check out. The pain almost broke him. And the mechanism that pulled him back from the ledge wasn't a logical syllogism about the nature of the universe. It was love.
Yeah, his father.
Right. He realized that his elderly father, who loved him desperately, would not be able to survive the grief of losing his son. Seneca writes, "I commanded myself to live. For sometimes it is an act of bravery even to live."
It's one of the most raw human moments in ancient literature. And it was from within that crucible of suffering that Seneca extracted his insights on the healing power of the mind.
How did he reframe it?
Well, he credited his survival to philosophy and the deep comfort of his friends. He recognized that while his physical lungs were trapped in illness, his mind retained the capacity to be free, active, and courageous.
Wow.
He began to diagnose the psychological architecture of suffering, arguing that our fear of death, which obviously amplifies the terror of illness, is a misdirected fear. We are fearing the natural cycle of nature and confusing it with the disease itself.
Okay, I have to push back hard on his specific arguments about pain, though.
I figured you might.
Because he attempts to comfort Lucilius by arguing that physical pain is inherently manageable due to its very nature. He claims that if pain is truly extreme, it will be shorter up. It will either kill you quickly or the body will protect itself by sending you into unconsciousness or numbness.
Right.
And if the pain is chronic and long-lasting, he argues it must have intervals of rest, it ebbs and flows. Modern listeners, especially anyone dealing with a severe autoimmune disease, fibromyalgia, or complex regional pain syndrome, will hear this and want to throw the book across the room.
Oh, absolutely. Telling someone whose nerves are on fire 24/7 that their pain is manageable because it will eventually kill them or they'll pass out feels incredibly condescending.
That reaction is entirely justified, and I think it is a major obstacle to engaging with this text. We cannot pretend that ancient Roman medicine understood the complex neurology of modern chronic pain syndromes.
Yeah, they just didn't have the science.
Seneca's medical understanding was limited. However, if we discard his entire philosophy of pain because his medical science was outdated, we miss the profound psychological tool he is actually offering.
Okay, what's the tool?
Seneca's core argument isn't a denial of the physical sensation. He isn't saying it doesn't hurt. His focus is entirely on the secondary suffering that the mind layers on top of the physical sensation.
Oh, like the Buddhist concept of the second dart.
Exactly that principle. The first dart is the physical pain. It hits you and it hurts. You cannot control it. The second dart is the story you tell yourself about the pain.
The narrative. Right. It's the anxiety that screams, what if this never stops? What if it gets worse tomorrow? Why is this happening to me? My life is ruined. Seneca argues that we multiply our suffering exponentially through imagination.
We just make it so much worse.
We drag the miseries of the past into the present by lamenting how long we've been sick, and we pre-suffer the future by anticipating tomorrow's agony.
Yeah, he says, pain is slight if opinion has added nothing to it. It sounds dismissive out of context, but the mechanism he's describing is incredibly relevant.
How so?
Well, Modern pain psychology, like the gate control theory of pain, shows that anxiety, fear, and catastrophic thinking actually open the neurological gates in the spinal cord, allowing more pain signals to reach the brain.
Wow, really? So it literally hurts more.
Yes. If you are terrified and focusing on the pain, it biologically hurts more. By learning to divorce the rational soul from the complaining body, by refusing to project into the future or dwell in the past, you close those gates. You isolate the pain to the present millisecond. And in any single millisecond, pain is usually bearable. It's the weight of time that crushes us.
Masterfully stated. And isolating our focus to the present moment is the exact mechanism required to face the ultimate test, which Seneca addresses in chapter 82, which is the fear of death.
The big one.
The Stoic position on death is notoriously uncompromising. They classify death as an indifferent. It is neither inherently good nor inherently evil. It is simply a biological fact, a return to the state of non-existence that preceded our birth.
So it just is.
Right. The only thing that possesses moral weight is how you face it. Death is made glorious or base entirely by the virtue or lack thereof of the individual enduring it.
He illustrates this by contrasting two major historical figures, right? Cato and Brutus.
Yes, a great comparison.
So Cato, facing defeat by Julius Caesar, chose to end his own life rather than submit to tyranny. He spent his final night reading philosophy, calm and resolute, and executed his death with unflinching courage. Seneca views that as a glorious death.
And then there's Brutus.
Brutus, on the other hand, when condemned and ordered to bare his throat for the executioner, hesitated. He begged for a moment's postponement, clinging to a few more seconds of life, whimpering that he would bare his throat if only he could live a little longer. Seneca views that desperate, undignified clinging as base and shameful.
The contrast highlights how the terror of losing our identity, our ego, our life strips away our dignity if we haven't philosophically prepared for it. But the historical Stoics, particularly the founder of the school, Zeno, had a very peculiar way of preparing for it.
I know.
They relied heavily on dense, highly technical, logical syllogisms to try and cure the fear of death.
The word puzzles. This drives me absolutely crazy when reading ancient philosophy.
I knew this would get you.
Zeno constructs this logical trap. He says, quote, "No evil is glorious, but death is glorious. Therefore, death is no evil." And I'm sorry, but this is utterly useless.
It really is.
If I am sitting in a cold, sterile doctor's office and the oncologist walks in and gives me a terminal diagnosis, a linguistic parlor trick is not going to stop the blood from freezing in my veins.
No, of course not.
It completely ignores the visceral, biological terror of mortality. It feels like trying to put out a house fire with a crossword puzzle.
I love that analogy, and here is where Seneca proves his brilliance as a practical psychologist. He agrees with your frustration entirely. He actively mocks his own philosophical school in this letter.
He does.
Yes. He tells Lucilius that he takes pleasure in poking fun at the absurdities of the Greeks. He recognizes that profound existential terror cannot be reasoned away with a petty syllogism.
Thank goodness.
He asks, are you hurling petty weapons like yours even against death? Can you stop a lion's charge with an awl? He knows that intellectual logic instantly disintegrates when confronted with raw biological fear.
So what is his solution if logic fails?
Visceral, blood and guts courage. Instead of dialectical lectures, Seneca points to human examples of immense bravery. He brings up Leonidas, the Spartan general at the Battle of Thermopylae.
Oh, the 300 Spartans?
Exactly. Facing overwhelming Persian forces and certain annihilation, Leonidas didn't sit his men down to debate the ontological nature of death. He looked at his warriors and said, "Fellow soldiers, let us to our breakfast, knowing that we shall sup in Hades."
Eat a hearty meal, because tonight we dine in the underworld.
It is raw, unfiltered defiance. It doesn't deny the reality or the fear of death. It steps into it with an expanded chest. Seneca argues that you conquer the fear of death not by tricking your brain with logic, but by elevating your spirit through courage.
That courage to dictate the terms of one's own end brings us to one of the most culturally difficult passages in this text. In chapter 77, Seneca introduces us to his friend Tullius Marcellinus. And we need to navigate this with extreme care.
Yes, definitely.
So Marcellinus falls ill with a chronic disease. It isn't necessarily immediately terminal, but it is relentless, demanding, and strips him of his independence. After consulting with his friends, Marcellinus decides he has had enough. He chooses to end his own life by fasting, eventually passing away peacefully in a hot bath.
And Seneca doesn't just report this, he praises it.
Right. He frames Marcellinus' suicide as a noble, gentle, and highly rational exit from a life that had become a burden.
This is a profound collision of paradigms. For a modern listener, all the alarm bells are ringing.
Oh, absolutely.
Our contemporary framework for understanding suicide is deeply intertwined with mental health, depression, and medical ethics. We view it as a tragic manifestation of psychological illness, a loss of hope where medical and psychiatric intervention is an absolute moral imperative.
As we should.
The ancient Roman Stoic, however, operated on a completely different ethical axis. For a Roman aristocrat, the preservation of dignity, agency, and rational control was paramount.
So it's about maintaining control.
Yes. In cases of severe physical decline, suicide was not seen as an act of despair, but as the ultimate exertion of rational agency. It was viewed as returning the ticket to the universe when the show was no longer worth watching.
Right. And we are obviously not endorsing the ancient Roman bioethic here. We have to separate the cultural practice of the time from the underlying philosophical principle. So what is the enduring wisdom hidden inside this highly uncomfortable story?
The wisdom is a radical reevaluation of how we measure the value of a life. Seneca is challenging our obsession with sheer longevity. He uses the analogy of a theatrical play.
What did he say?
He says, "It is with life as it is with a play. It matters not how long the action is spun out, but how good the acting is." Modern society is obsessed with the biological extension of time. We want to biohack our way to 100, 110, 120 years old.
We swallow supplements, jump in ice baths, and track our sleep to maximize our lifespan.
Exactly. But Seneca's asking the uncomfortable question, to what end? Are you just extending the length of a play where the acting is terrible? What is the point of living to 100 if those years are filled with anxiety, greed, and a lack of virtue? The focus must shift from the quantity of our days to the moral density of our days.
That makes me think of a modern television series. We've all watched a show that had 3 absolutely perfect, brilliant seasons.
Oh, definitely.
And then the network forces it to keep going because it's profitable. And by season 8, the writing is terrible, the characters are ruined, and it's just a painful slog.
They ruin the legacy.
The show lost its integrity by trying to maximize its length. Seneca saying, "Don't let your life be season 8. To illustrate this, he uses the beautiful imagery of the Alexandrian mail boats arriving in Campania.
I love this part.
These are the fast ships that arrived ahead of the massive grain fleets.
Yeah.
When they spotted the topsails of these boats, the entire town would rush to the docks in a frantic frenzy to get news from abroad.
And Seneca observes this chaos from a distance.
Exactly. He stays back, finding profound joy in his own laziness. He realizes he doesn't need to join the frantic rush. And he applies this to life itself. You don't need to frantically rush to the absolute bitter end of the journey to find satisfaction.
It's okay to just be complete.
A life doesn't need to be long to be complete, as long as it is honorable. A life can be complete at 30 or 40 or 80. The completeness is dictated by virtue, not the calendar.
So the practical application here is to aggressively divide and conquer your suffering. The practice for the listener is to build a firewall around the present moment. Root out the anticipation of future pain and the recounting of past miseries. Deal only with the challenge of this specific hour.
That's incredibly practical.
And the reflection caution is one of brutal honesty. Are you making your current troubles heavier by complaining to yourself? Are you adding the crushing weight of your own opinion to a reality that you could otherwise bear with dignity?
If you can build that inner fortress, if you can strip away the external identity, isolate your physical suffering, and make peace with the length of your play, you might think you've won. But there is a final test.
The outside world.
Because unless you are a hermit in a cave, you eventually have to step outside that fortress and interact with the rest of humanity. That brings us to Seneca's deep dive into navigating the social world. We have to deal with the complexities of gratitude, the seduction of fame, and the insidious nature of our own daily habits.
Right. Seneca turns his analytical lens onto human behavior and society, starting with a radical reframing of gratitude in Chapter 81. Most of us operate on a transactional model of gratitude.
What do you mean by transactional?
It's an accounting system. Someone does me a favor and I owe them a thank you or a return favor to balance the cosmic ledger. It is a debt to be repaid. But Seneca argues that being grateful is primarily for your own good, not your neighbor's. He elevates gratitude from a social pleasantry to a state of divine happiness.
It enlarges the soul of the person feeling it, regardless of the person receiving it.
Precisely the point. He pushes this to an extreme that challenges every modern networking instinct. He says that even if you are surrounded by ungrateful people, people who take your favors and never return them, or worse, betray you, you must continue to give.
Wow, even if they betray you.
Yes. He warns that if you become cynical, if you decide you will only give when a return on investment is guaranteed, you will never give at all. And by protecting yourself from ungrateful people, you end up cheating yourself out of the profound joy and virtue of generosity.
We discussed this comparison earlier, but it is so striking. This isn't just a Stoic anomaly. If you look at the Bhagavad Gita, one of the central tenets of karma yoga is the imperative to perform your duty, to do the right action, without any attachment to the fruits, the results of that action.
That's a beautiful parallel.
You give because giving is the right action. You act virtuously because virtue is its own reward. Seneca is mirroring this perfectly. He says the wages of a good deed is simply to have done it.
But implement that in the modern corporate world, and it feels like professional suicide. We live in a hyper-transactional culture. We literally keep score.
I endorsed them on LinkedIn. Why didn't they endorse me?
Exactly. I introduced them to that client. They owe me a referral. We view our social interactions as a stock portfolio that must yield dividends. Seneca is pointing out that if you live with that transactional mindset, you are operating from a mindset of poverty. You are starving yourself of the divine state of simply being a generous human being.
And that same transactional external mindset poisons how we view success, which Seneca breaks down in chapter 79 through his analysis of fame. He delivers one of the most brilliant metaphors of the entire text. He calls fame the shadow of virtue.
It is a stunning visual. A shadow attends the body. It is cast by the body. Sometimes it stretches out far in front of you, arriving before you do. Sometimes it lags far behind you.
Like with historical figures who were ignored in their time?
Right. In some cases, like with Socrates or Epicurus, the shadow of fame lags so far behind that it only arrived decades or centuries after they were dead. They were persecuted or ignored in their own time.
But the substance didn't change.
Exactly. Seneca's point is that the substance casting the shadow, true virtue, does not change its size based on the shadow it casts. He uses Mount Etna, the great volcano, as his anchor point. Mount Etna does not shrink if the flames recede, or if a traveler views it from 20 miles away instead of 5 miles away. The mountain remains massive.
The modern translation of this is painfully clear, and it targets our deepest modern insecurity. Fame and its modern equivalents, followers, viral metrics, blue check marks, being an influencer are shadows. They're projections.
Just shadows.
If you spend your life desperately chasing the shadow, trying to manipulate algorithms to make the shadow larger, you lose focus on the substance. You eventually become a hollow shell, projecting a massive shadow, but possessing zero internal density.
That is so true.
If you focus entirely on the substance, on building actual skills, genuine character, and profound reason, the shadow will do whatever the shadow does. The algorithm will favor you or ignore you. It doesn't matter. Mount Etna remains Mount Etna.
But how do you maintain the substance of the mountain day after day? How do you prevent the passions from creeping back in and eroding the rock? In chapter 83, Seneca shifts from high philosophy to the granular mechanics of daily habits.
And this is one of the most delightful letters to read.
Because he gives Lucilius a detailed breakdown of his exact daily routine.
He is undeniably the original productivity hacker. You read this, and it sounds like a morning routine video on YouTube. He tracks everything.
What's his routine?
He tells Lucilius, I started the day doing some reading. Then I exercised with my young slave, Varius. And Seneca even has a little self-deprecating humor here, joking that the young man is outpiecing him because Seneca is getting old and losing his teeth.
I love that human detail.
After the workout, he takes a cold bath. Although he admits he's getting a bit softer in his old age, he prefers the water slightly warmed by the sun now, rather than jumping into the freezing canal like he used to.
So no more ancient ice plunges.
Right. Then he eats a meager lunch of dry bread without even setting a table, takes a very brief micro-nap, and then forces himself to get back to intense philosophical work, ignoring the deafening roar of the chariot races happening outside his window.
It is a fiercely disciplined, structured architecture for a day. He engineers his environment and his habits to reinforce his reason and keep his body subordinate to his mind.
It's intense.
But within this letter, outlining his perfect routine, he tackles a very specific, dangerous vice that threatens to unravel all of that discipline: drunkenness. He defines drunkenness with a chilling phrase: insanity purposely assumed.
Okay, I have to pause here because reading this, a part of me thought, well, Seneca is just being an insufferable buzzkill.
Right, the fun police.
Exactly. He eats dry bread on the floor, takes cold plunges, and now he's writing an essay about why drinking is bad. It sounds like the worst dinner party guest in history. Is this just ancient Puritanism?
It's a very common reaction, but it misses the core of his argument. Seneca is not inherently against a glass of wine. In other writings, he acknowledges the relaxing properties of it. What he is viciously attacking is the voluntary surrender of rational control.
So it's about the loss of agency.
Yes, he is attacking intoxication. He argues that alcohol doesn't magically create new vices out of thin air. Rather, it dismantles the rational fortress you've built, bringing all your lurking subterranean evils out of hiding. It systematically removes the healthy sense of shame and consequence that keeps our worst, most destructive traits in check.
Insanity purposely assumed. You are choosing to drink a potion that turns off the very reason that makes you human.
Exactly. And he doesn't rely on theory to prove this.
Yeah.
He uses the catastrophic failures of history. He points to Alexander the Great, a man who conquered the known world, but who, in a drunken rage at a banquet, drove a spear through his dearest friend, Cletus.
Awful.
He points to Mark Antony, a brilliant general, who became a cruel, bloodthirsty tyrant when heavy with wine. These were men of unimaginable power, world conquerors, who were ultimately vanquished and humiliated by a wine cask. They willingly assumed insanity, and it destroyed their legacies.
And what is so satisfying is that Seneca, yet again, takes the opportunity to shred the intellectual pretensions of his own Stoic predecessors.
Oh, Zeno again.
Yes. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, tried to argue against drunkenness using another one of his famous useless syllogisms.
Let's hear it.
Zeno argued, quote, "No one entrusts a secret to a drunk. Therefore, the good man will not get drunk." And Seneca basically rolls his eyes, looks at the actual data of human behavior, and says that is empirically false.
He brings receipts. He provides immediate, real-world counterexamples from Roman politics. He talks about Lucius Piso, who served as the director of public safety at Rome.
Right.
Piso was a notorious alcoholic. He was drunk essentially his entire term in office. He would sleep until noon to recover from the previous night's banquets. And yet, Emperor Augustus trusted Piso with highly classified secret orders, and Piso performed his duties flawlessly and never leaked a single secret.
That's hilarious.
Seneca uses another example of an official named Causus, who did the exact same thing. Seneca's point is devastating to Zeno. He's saying, your logical syllogisms fail in the real world. Don't base your morality on clever wordplay about secret keeping.
Base it on reality.
Base your morality on the undeniable inherent ugliness of intentionally losing your mind and degrading yourself to the level of a savage.
The application of this goes so far beyond alcohol. Think about the modern corporate retreat, where the shame guardrails are removed by an open bar and people incinerate their careers in a single night.
Oh, we've all heard the horror stories.
But it also applies to any habit or substance we use to escape our reality or lower our inhibitions. When we doom scroll for 4 hours to numb our anxiety, or when we use substances to avoid processing our grief, we aren't just blowing off steam. We are intentionally opening the gates of the fortress.
We're letting the invaders in.
We are letting the diseases of the soul out of their cages to run wild in our minds.
So what is the ultimate defense mechanism against this slow degradation? How do we ensure the fortress remains secure? Seneca concludes with a very specific, non-negotiable daily practice in chapter 83, the daily review.
Tell me about it.
He insists that every single night you must interrogate your own life. He writes, what makes us wicked is that no one of us looks back over his own life. We are perpetually leaning into the future, obsessing over what we are about to do, that we never analyze the quality of what we just did.
It is the ultimate audit of the soul. The practice for the listeners to start this tonight. Take 5 to 10 minutes before you close your eyes and play the tape of the day back in reverse. Ask yourself the hard questions. Like, where did I act with perfected reason today? Where did I let a sudden passion, a flash of anger at a coworker hijack my behavior? Was I chasing the shadow of fame and validation today, or was I building the substance of virtue? Did I evaluate people by their gold prow or by their character?
And we can attach a very specific reflection regarding gratitude from chapter 81 to that daily review. Ask yourself, when someone wronged you today, especially someone who has helped you in the past, did you balance the ledger fairly?
Ooh, the accounting.
Seneca says the truly good person voluntarily cheats themselves in this accounting. They intentionally add weight to the past benefit and subtract weight from the current injury. Practice that tomorrow.
That sounds really hard.
It is. When a friend or partner annoys you, consciously inflate the memory of a past kindness they did for you and consciously shrink the importance of the current annoyance. Watch how rapidly it diffuses your anger and restores your internal peace.
It forces you to operate from a place of abundance, rather than petty transactional scorekeeping. It is incredibly difficult, but it completely changes the texture of your relationships.
As we step back and look at this massive architectural blueprint of the human soul navigating our passions, enduring our physical decay, facing our mortality, and managing our social interactions, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought to process.
I'm ready.
Throughout these chapters, Seneca repeatedly demonstrates a terrifying truth. We are almost always the architects of our own slavery. We are slaves to our complaining bodies because we refuse to control our opinions. We are slaves to our anxiety because we pre-suffer the future.
Right.
We are slaves to our wealth because we fear losing it. And we are slaves to the crowd because we are desperate for the shadow of their recognition.
We spend our entire lives building the very chains that bind us, convinced that we are building armor.
Exactly. So the ultimate question to carry with you from Seneca today is this. Look at your life right now. What if the very things you were working so exhaustingly hard to build, the impressive job title, the massive professional network, the growing bank account, the beautiful pedestal, are the exact things keeping you imprisoned? What if true, unassailable freedom isn't found in acquiring more of the gold prow, but is found simply and quietly in putting down the mask today?
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.